aggressively to any negative news they hear. Now, the bottom line is the early evaluation and reports on the number of people who were infected and who had bad results from the infection was very alarming. If you go back 6 to 8 weeks ago, the number of people that were shown to have the virus and were getting really sick was alarming, because this was somewhat unusual for conventional flu, at least the way conventional flu is reported. Now, the fact is that we really don't fully understand when this virus first made landfall here in the United States. There are some who speculate that it may have come here as early as last fall. A virus like this has characteristics that dictate its rate of spread. Some of those characteristics are: how long can somebody be carrying it and infected with it where they don't have symptoms, yet they can still infect others? If that period is long, then one person can interact with many, many more people and potentially be a source of infection for those people. Influenza, the incubation period is relatively short, which means if you got it, within a few days, a day or two, you're starting to have symptoms, you isolate yourself naturally from the crowd. You're not infecting that many people. But if you can carry it for 7 to 10 to 14 days, relatively asymptomatic, you may infect hundreds of people. And therefore, the exponent, how many people wind up ultimately get exposed, is that much higher. It's very suspicious how quickly this particular viral infection affected many, many people. That's number one. Number two is that although the vast majority of people, probably 90%, who are exposed and get infected, actually have very mild or no symptoms at all. And these people don't even seek help of the physician or a hospital. But a small percentage that are going to the hospital and are seen to have, in fact, been infected do develop very severe complications. Those complications can include difficulty breathing, in some cases necessitating being on a ventilator. And we're actually learning more and more that the ventilatory problems are not like a conventional pneumonia. They may, in fact, be far more insidious. They may, in fact, involve the way oxygen gets across the lung into the blood, and even how the oxygen is carried in the bloodstream. That being said, for roughly every 100 patients who is so alarmed that they go to the emergency room, 80 of them are sent home because they're not that sick. 20 wind up staying in the hospital, and of that 20, 4 to 6 of those get sick enough they have to be put in the ICU. So the numbers are not that alarming. But remember, when the news first carried the possibilities that this pandemic could affect millions and millions of patients, and when the lethality rate was originally estimated to be as high as 5%, everyone panicked. People, if your wife or your child or your brother or your mother started to develop symptoms, you ran to the emergency room. Most people with the amplitude of symptoms that they had, under normal circumstances, if this wasn't on the front page of every news, would stay home and rough it out.
Exactly right.
But in contrast, this was such a crisis call that people were running.
This fear produced mass number of people going to the hospital who wouldn't normally go there, overran the hospitals.
That's right.
Certainly got in the way in certain countries like Italy and so forth, where they're able to operate normally and do what they normally do. But then also all that fear was really based on algorithms that came from initial small group of people from China who were extremely ill, not understanding who might be infected as a whole. So we're used to the flu with 20 to 40 million people being infected in the US alone every year, and us having 35 to 80,000 deaths. Those are seen normal. This year, the CDC says we have 39 million people infected with the flu. There have been 29,000 deaths here in the United States in this exact time period. And we've had 200,000 hospital visits, but none of that gets reported. Because what's happening is what's new about this, we had 0 cases, and then we found the virus, and now we started testing for it ever. And as you know, Bob, wherever we test, we find more and more of it. But it's changing the morbidity or the death rate. Everything was based on these algorithms. That's what Dr. Fauci and everyone else did with the best intent of protecting us and going 3.5%, 4.5%, 5% death rate versus flu, which might be 0.1, 2, or 3 or 4, less than 0.5%. And they decided to take giant action. Dr. Fauci's a good man. He's worked his tail off. He's been around, he's 70 plus years old. And he's been telling people up until now, because it was his best estimate, all these formulas, we all know bad data in, bad data out, right? Algorithms they're only as good as what you put in. These 3.5%, 4.5% morbidity rates they're talking about being far greater than the flu, he's now correcting that a week ago. This is New England Journal of Medicine, as you well know, one of the most respected journals in the United States. Let's read it together. March 26th. If one assumes that the number of asymptomatic, meaning no symptoms, or minimally symptomatic cases is several times as high as the number of recorded cases, the case fatality rate may be considerably less than 1%. That suggests that the overall clinical consequences of COVID-19 may also be more akin to those of a severe seasonal influenza, which means flu, versus SARS or MERS, which were at 9, 10, and 36%. Yet, unfortunately, on the news, he committed weeks ago, 200,000 to 2 million people were going to die. And so he said it again, 200,000 probably. And they asked him in the news, and reporters, you said 2 million. He goes, that's still possible. The numbers don't show that to be true right now. And yet people are scared and we're shutting down our economy on it. So I'd love your comments on these, because these are facts. They're not suggestions of some right-wing conspiracy. This is not saying there's conspiracy. It's just saying people are trying to protect, and maybe they've overreacted to something because it's so new. What are your comments on this?
So, you hit on a lot of important points. Let's go over a couple of them. First of all, what has completely alarmed everyone is that early prediction that the death rate could be as high as 5%. Remember, 5% means 1 in 20 people die. It means that more than that actually get sick, but 1 in 20 actually die. That means lots of people will die, right? 0.1%.
Based on the New York numbers, it should be 148,000 people. I just read the article, right. Based on the original projection, and obviously it's not.
But influenza deaths, 0.1%, that's 1 in 1,000, okay? I bet you that very few of us can remember a friend or loved one who died of influenza. So that 5% lethality rate that was originally quoted was the basis for everyone's reflexive and panicked response to this crisis. Now, you mentioned something else which is very important. The data is being derived from numbers based upon certain test results, many of which are not reflective of the biology. And let me explain that. The first test available was a test for the presence of the virus, which is looking for the nucleic acids of the coronavirus itself. They swab the surface of your nasal mucosa. It's not a comfortable thing, but they do it. And then they measure whether or not you have the nucleic acids from this virus. That says you have what's called